Hello, class. Welcome to our second edition of our makeup lectures. I wanted to cover the second class that we missed previously in the semester. And so I was deciding on what I would want to cover today. And I decided to cover chapter 17 in your textbook. And this deals with project selection, but really looking at projects in terms of a portfolio. In this case, you have several projects that are ongoing and deciding whether or not to continue certain ones or to drop certain ones, and what are some criteria that we can use to do those analyses. So the first thing that I want to talk about is project portfolio management. Similar to like a investment portfolio, really what you're trying to do with your projects is maximize your ROI, or your return on investment, and minimize risk. Okay, so it's very similar in that regard, but at the same time, we need to look at what benefits we are yielding from each of these projects. In terms of linking our project portfolio with strategy, strategy is something that's really driven at the very top of an organization. It's very similar to what their vision is as an organization, and whether or not the projects that are selected are in line with that vision or are in line with that strategy. So that's really what we need to focus on. And once again, it is a method for also evaluating current projects. That's something that is an ongoing process in terms of judging whether or not to continue on certain opportunities. Further in project portfolio management, once again, what we're trying to do is assess different key aspects of any project. One other aspect that we've talked about before is whether or not the organization even has resources to complete the tasks. A lot of times, what happens in industry is a company will bid or respond to an RFP in hopes of acquiring the resources needed prior to getting awarded, if that's the case. And many times, if they do get awarded and they don't have those resources, well, that puts them in a very awkward circumstance. And so, once again, it's very important to have a balanced approach when we select our different projects. In terms of the overall flow of managing projects, really what we have here is strategic management, which is once again senior, what we call C-level objectives that are set for the organization. And then we look at the actual projects that are being selected and whether or not they kind of line up with the strategies and objectives of the company. And also if it could help them in terms of acquiring new opportunities. A lot of times business is won based on past performance, and so really focusing on current projects and delivering and above and beyond what's required always helps an organization. We also have this concept of gating, which is basically looking at our portfolio of projects and assessing them quantitatively whether or not we should continue. And then obviously we incorporate all aspects of project management. So in other words, we can pretty much look at this as like a system with inputs and outputs. In terms of the different areas, once again, strategic management is more at a very high level management, considered the top level management. So your president and VPs. Then you get down to your portfolio management, and that's really identifying opportunities that are in line with the visions set by the senior management. And then the gating methodology is really understanding whether or not we need to add additional resources to current projects, or if those projects should continue at all. So we need to make that final assessment. And then obviously all the techniques that we've covered in class this semester, regardless of which project they have been assigned, we need to incorporate all the areas of the system life cycle for a successful outcome. In terms of managing the portfolio of projects, obviously, we need to identify our stakeholders. And, once again, as you guys can see here, I use the term C-level management. And so you see any of these positions that start with the C, that's what we're referring to. So once again, these are representative of your higher level management that are involved in terms of guiding and steering the progress for the selection of projects. Here we have a overall breakout in terms of how the flow works. We have our high-level vision and strategy that's defined once again by high-level management, and that kind of feeds down to the rest of the organization. The first step is the proposed projects. So once again, we need to do some feasibility analysis. Do we have the resources? Is it in line with our vision? We respond to proposals. We do our gating analysis to see whether or not we want to continue. And then we identify which projects we feel would have the greatest impact or greatest benefit to our organization. And this basically goes down to the various sections of this slide here. Pre-screening, once again, evaluating different opportunities. As I mentioned, doing that feasibility study. We may have also discussed early in the semester of having an individual or a group of individuals that really promote that project or that idea. And they're the ones that are called the champions. And then someone obviously needs to sign off on that work, and that would be the sponsor. So similar to our class, I would be considered your sponsor for each of your projects. And then moving on, we have our proposal stage. We analyze the proposal as submitted. We incorporate different metrics and scoring methods for these various projects. And we'll dive into that a little bit more here shortly. And then we get into the actual portfolio selection. And once again, it's very similar to, and I mentioned before, investment portfolio analysis, where you want to have a good mix of projects. We call that like a diverse portfolio of projects that really show the flexibility of your overall organization. And then, we have what's called a gating process. Okay, and a gating process is to just look at what projects we have currently and to assess whether or not we need to continue. Are the benefits in line with the organization? Are we deviating from that objective? Are we over budget, behind schedule? Is it creating, reputation risk? We talked about that. So this is something that we have to do for all our projects, right? Not just one project, but really the entire portfolio of projects. And this kind of talks to the filtering out of projects or ideas or proposals that either we want to proceed with or we do not want to proceed with. So we may have lots of proposed ideas or proposals that we want to respond to, but once we do our analyses in-house in our organization, we may find out that a lot of those ideas get filtered out. And, the purpose of doing this type of research or investigation, once again, is to minimize the overall risk of your company. And there's different methods, different metrics. We can also use different financial models. When we talk about, what's, for instance, what we call the NPV or a net present value, if you want to reference the textbook, page 626, we can calculate return on investment for our projects. We can calculate, as we discussed most recently, earned value and estimated cost to complete. Perhaps we estimate cost to complete, and it's way over what we initially conceptualized. So that would be another reason for the gating mechanism and to perhaps terminate a project. And many other different types of metrics and ratios that we can calculate to really identify the overall health of a given project. And then we get into what's called scoring cards or scoring models. Similar to how we score risks, we talked about that earlier, but we can also do that for projects and see how well that project actually fits within our vision of our organization. And if you hear a crying baby, my apologies. I'm babysitting as well, so that's just how it goes. Different scoring models, different criteria. What are the criteria for scoring? As you guys see here, we have a nominal scorecard, and we do some weighting if that's the need. Here's what a scorecard would look like. So once again, what we're doing is we're just breaking down our project, whether or not it's meeting our goals, whether it fits with our vision of our company, is it meeting some of our financial objectives, what's the long-term outlook, and we just do a general scoring, and we get some kind of impact score, and we translate this into, once again, identifying whether or not we are going to pursue this project, continue with the project, or perhaps even terminate the project. Excuse me. And once again, this also ties into the gating aspect of project portfolio management, whether or not we want to continue. What we can actually do is, I'm just skipping here. What we can actually do is set criteria, right? So if I want a minimum score, like let's look at all these different projects here. Let's just say, like I say as a general rule of thumb, that any project below 3, I'm going to terminate. Okay, so this is kind of how all this ties together, is what's the ranking score, and whether or not we want to continue with a given project. One other area that we can look at in terms of gating and filtering these projects is what we call looking at it from a utilization standpoint, or understanding the waste of that project. Perhaps some resources for a given project in a portfolio are not being utilized or not optimized. And so we need to examine what could be going on there, how we can improve the overall project mix of our portfolio. So there's many different applications here. This is a pretty interesting example of what we call a bubble diagram. And let's just say that these are all different projects that you see. The size of the project is given by the size of the bubble, right? So like Model T is a larger project than BHTM. And so what I mean by larger, perhaps more resources are being allocated. And really what we're trying to do is map out the likelihood of success, as you guys see here on the y-axis, and what is our reward, right? Obviously, as you guys see here, pearls are ideal, right? That's kind of where we would like to be. And then things or projects that fall in the white elephants may not be something that we would want to pursue. So this would be another way of scoring our projects and using the gating process. Okay, and what we can actually do is we can plot this. This is kind of like a threshold line that we can say, actually I have it here, yeah. What we can say is, once we plot this threshold line has different names for it. Sometimes we call it the efficient frontier. So anything below this line are projects that would be dropped. Okay, so it's a very useful tool, actually, when we're, once again, optimizing our portfolio of projects. Different methods that we can incorporate in terms of strategic fit. We can identify categories or buckets, and once again, score the project or projects based on these certain categories or buckets. And these buckets can fall into certain categories such as this, in terms of location, in terms of what type of project, what type of product are we pushing out, is it in line with our strategic goals, so on and so forth. I believe we talked about cost benefit. One of the things that we do, especially later on in the life cycle of a project, is whether or not it is reaching the point of diminishing returns where I continue to invest, but the return that I'm getting back on that project or projects is no longer a linear relationship, but it's starting to taper off and it's more asymptotic, and we see some curvature. So at that point, I would say that I'd probably need to terminate the project and replace it with some new technology altogether. Okay, so once again, many different resources or approaches, I should say. In this, what we're doing is we're measuring different projects by their financial benefits versus cost. So obviously, we would like to maximize our benefits and perhaps minimize our cost. Once again, another way to kind of evaluate the health of our projects. And this is also a good tool to kind of see how well we're forecasting and estimating and how well actual costs kind of compare to those forecasts. Okay. And so as I think that's a good prelude in terms of cost effectiveness. How well are these projects performing? Are they maximizing utility? Are we maximizing our resources? Are we on track? Are we behind schedule? So on and so forth. And once again, we can compare several projects at the same time. In this case, we're using different types of factors. These could be like requirements, and score them overall and tie in cost and see how our scoring versus cost looks like for our various projects. So many different applications for examining different types of projects in totality. And lastly, I just wanted to sum up by talking about the gating process. Once again, in order to understand gating, it really requires in-depth knowledge. So this is why we incorporate a lot of the stakeholders of the project who have in-depth knowledge. Understanding resource capacity analysis. Once again, does the organization have the sufficient resources to complete the project, but to complete it successfully? Okay. And then obviously we integrate the gating process with the overall portfolio management. So that leads me to the end of the discussion. What I would like you guys to do as your assignment is tell me the benefits of using a scoring mechanism for evaluating a portfolio of projects. So just in one paragraph, tell me why we need to score various projects collectively. What benefits does it provide an organization? What information does it provide an organization? Okay, excuse me, I'm losing my voice here. I've been talking quite a bit. With that, I am going to sign off, and thank you again for listening all.